Greetings all, and welcome to the fourth segment of A Traveler's Guide to for Tallon IV. And today we'll be continuing with a look at the planet in this next segment, A Traveler's Guide to Phendrana Drifts. Phendrana Drifts is a frozen world unto itself, and is located at the far western and southwestern edge of the life-supporting lands of Tallon IV, being geographically higher than any other part of the habitable zone. The fact that this land is so much colder than the rest might not make sense considering the rest of the planet is much more hospitable to temperate creatures, but the area was likely a bit warmer in the past before the climate of the planet was shifted by the impact of the Leviathan into the planet. Plus, it is much farther away from the rest of the habitable land and can only be accessed through magmar caverns in most cases, suggesting that the normal climate of the area may just simply be different. Phendrana Drifts is split into three main areas, each with their own unique fauna and objects to interact with. The Phendrana shorelines and associated areas are the main entranceway to the frozen land and are filled with minor canyons and the remains of chosen ruins scattered across its breadth. Though the buildings have been completely abandoned with ice and snow starting to reclaim their territory alongside a few monsters that are adapted to the extreme cold. The farthest parts of the drifts surrounding the chamber aptly named Phendrana's Edge constitute an entirely different area as almost completely flooded with water, and the caverns that are still open and not filled are short and relatively empty, save for the occasional flicker bat. Lastly, it is noted that Phendrana Drifts is home to remains of a space-powered research facility called Glacier 1, which is built in the frozen land in order to take advantage of the weakness to cold that Metroids possess to make them more docile and easier to transport. The Hunter was able to infiltrate the base and effectively shut it down for the most part, destroying the present weapon systems in place, both organic, inorganic, and anything else between, and as a consequence, the place has essentially been all but abandoned entirely. While the land might look utterly gorgeous, and rightfully so, the extremely cold temperatures of the land make it imperative to bring thermal gear that can help protect against the extreme cold, as well as plenty of lights if one wishes to explore the abandoned space-powered facilities present, as a lack of power has left its deepest depths shrouded in darkness. Just please don't steal stuff there. Science team would prefer to not have what's left that is stolen by random tourists. As far as can be spoken on previously covered organisms, Phendrana Drifts is home to gel saps and aqua reapers in the watery depths of its outskirts, and further features a type of fish aside from those seen in other parts of the planet that is totally unique to its waters. Trumper fish represent an unknown species that is only found in ice within the watery cavernous outer limits of Phendrana Drifts. These fish are readily distinguished from other fish on Tallon IV by the larger body size and the jaw, as they possess a massive underbite with large sharp teeth that could likely deal some considerable damage if they were still alive to attack. It is unknown what exactly happened to these creatures and why they are trapped in ice in the first place, but given their form in comparison to others, they are likely the ancestors of the fish species still alive in Tallon IV, and may have certainly been a threat worth knowing in their heyday, though now they are nothing more than frozen decorations in the icy depths of Phendrana's waters. With that now covered, let's get into the nitty-gritty of the major life forms that roam the frozen landscape of Phendrana Drifts. The crystallite is a territorial scavenger found in Phendrana Drifts of Tallon IV that is relatively harmless on its own, though close contact with it is still not advised. These insects are classified as scavengers as they have little in the way of true offers to work with, the large mandibles and sharp front appendages being the only means of tearing off and devouring meat. This works fine for the crystallite though, as it's effectively invulnerable to attacks of the predators that populate Phendrana Drifts. When crystallites are first born, they gather together in large groups and use their powerful mandibles and front appendages to grasp and hang onto the ceilings of a cavern with all of their strength, entering a sort of biological stasis in the process. As these creatures rest, water from the ceiling slowly trickles down onto them and attaches to a coating on the top of their bodies that acts as a catalyzing agent for crystal growth. As time goes on, they continue to accumulate frozen water on their backs until they build up a sufficient amount of ice to form a large barb of the material that covers their entire body. After this, these creatures will exit their stasis and drop down onto the ground, immediately going out to search for dead and frozen carcasses in the drifts to satiate their hunger with. In their adult form, these creatures are effectively immune to most types of beam weapons, as their crystalline protection reflects beam energy quite readily. This is also the reason why they really have few natural predators, as only monsters like the adult she-goth are able to easily crush their durable ice shells. In saying this though, these creatures can still be blown apart easily with a blast from a missile, and the intense heat of the space-powered plasma beam can kill them in a single shot. Even so, these creatures are barely left alone to live out their daily lives in peace, as the only trouble they can present is being an obstacle that can only hurt anything that gets close enough for them to strike with their mandibles and front appendages, and thus are more than deserving of a place in threat level alpha. Flicker bats are fascinating creatures that pose little threat to most, but are nonetheless surprisingly difficult to observe and track down. Flicker bats are harmless organisms possessing a striking blue, gray, and orange body, an elongated tail and a simple face with a thin beak and two shining eyes, while the head is constantly enveloped in an energy shield that serves to keep its sensitive face free of dust and ice particles. In general, these beasts spend their time flying around in search of insects and other small prey items, riding on air currents for sustenance, though they have been known to scavenge their carcasses of larger animals if they're not being eaten by anything else. Flicker bats have really small wings in comparison to their body size, so they have to flap their wings extremely fast in order to maintain flight. Furthermore, it is known that they tend to hunt in cyclical flying patterns, circling around only small structures and areas over and over again for the majority of their life and using their sonar to navigate. In fact, flicker bat biologically cannot roost at all, as they do not have any limbs aside from their wings, and in turn must give birth to live young while they are flying, with only a few offspring usually being able to maintain flight and survive. What makes these creatures interesting from a visual perspective, however, is the fact that they possess a unique form of optical camouflage in the skin cells that allows them to shift the pigments in the skin to take on the appearance of the background, completely shielding them from view. The only time they let this camouflage drop is when they are about to snatch a meal out of the air. This camouflage is so effective that most watchers are unable to really keep track of them, leaving X-ray visor technology as the only way to reliably track them in the air. Thankfully though, this is of little consequence to most, as these mammal-like creatures never intentionally try to attack others, making direct contact the only way they can actually damage something if it gets in the way of their set flight patterns, and thus more than earn a position within threat level alpha. The members of the she-goth family represent the most powerful predators in Phendrana Drifts of Tallon IV, and can be a serious problem to deal with in any age. Even as infants, baby she-goth are vicious creatures that can tear apart their prey despite the fact that they lack much of the power possessed by their adult form. These creatures possess 6 eyes that are covered by a thick icy plate that protects their eyes as they develop, as these creatures usually spend most of the time hiding in little burrows that they dig and place their heads and lower bodies in. This is because these creatures are usually nocturnal and will only hunt when daylight starts to wane. When these beasts detect something nearby from vibrations in the ground, however, they'll quickly leap from their small burrows and will attack viciously with their powerful teeth. These beasts are relentless fighters and will slowly hunt and devour anything that dares to go near them, and they are not afraid to show blind aggression in a fight. The real problem is getting near them, however, as they typically rely on a blast of ultra-frigid gas from their mouths to freeze their prey solid, at which point the infants can chow down on their prey item without fearing a counterattack. This can encapsulate even human-sized creatures in ice, though it can be broken out of with enough force. Baby she-goths, like their adult form, are generally impervious to damage on most parts of their body, but the infants do have one major weakness: their backs. The backs of these creatures, which is where the energy crystals of their adult form will grow from, are highly sensitive in this stage and are easily damaged. As a result, baby she-goths generate a thick layer of ice over their vulnerable backs in order to protect it. This icy covering can take a considerable amount of punishment before it breaks, but when it does happen, the infant will need at least a few hours to regenerate their shell. As such, they will do everything in their power to keep their backs turned away from their attackers at all times, making it difficult to get a clean shot in, though heat-based weapons can easily destroy them with almost no effort. While they may indeed be merely infants in this state, the aggression these young ones show, as well as their potent resilience to damage, easily earns them a place within threat level beta, and are best handled with careful maneuvering to avoid their attacks and to strike at their backs as self-defense is required to handle them. The fully grown adult she-goth is a fearsome beast to behold and the supreme predator of Phendrana Drifts, with nothing else being capable of seriously harming it. Adult she-goth possess a massive frame and powerful jaws that can crush rock, but it's actually the projectile attacks that can make the most impact in battle. These creatures, where there was once a vulnerable weak point on their backs as infants, have massive organic crystals of an unknown composition growing from their backs that have the power to channel energy straight from their environment naturally in order to energize the body of the she-goth. This goes for beam weapons as well, as any non-thermal beam shot directed towards this beast will instantly be absorbed by the crystals on its back. Aside from using ultra-frigid gas to freeze nearby prey like the infants, when adult she-goth are fully energized and the back crystals are sparkling heavily with energy, they can focus the energy into balls of frigid energy that they can then fire at enemies to deal massive damage and potentially freeze them in place. However, these monsters have poor stamina as a result of living in freezing environments, so after using this powerful attack, they tend to hyperventilate in order to quickly rest and regain their composure. At this point, these beasts will have their mouths left open, exposing their face and even their bellies to damage from concussive weapons. As such, missiles to the face and explosives to the belly can damage the she-goth while it's hyperventilating, and this seems to be the only reliable way to kill them, though they can still easily be destroyed with shots from the space-powered plasma beam without their back crystals absorbing the energy. The she-goth is a powerful beast and can take a considerable amount of punishment, but is still only a basic predator with decent vision and can be taken down as long as one is careful to stay as far away from them as much as possible until it is vulnerable to attack. If one lacks the firepower to make this happen, however, their imposing frames and incredible resilience can make them a sheer terror to have to deal with, and more that deserve a place within threat level Gamma, usually best left to their own devices if one can find a way to sneak by them without alerting them into a state of aggression. Ice beetles are a variety of beetles that have adapted to the frigid conditions of Phendrana Drifts and are almost identical to the more common relative. The only major difference between beetles and ice beetles is the fact that ice beetles have developed an icy covering over their bodies in order to insulate heat from their body and in turn protect them against attack. Though for reasons that are still uncertain, this seems to have also augmented their digging abilities in the permafrost of the region. This can make them more difficult to kill than a normal beetle, but their penchant for burrowing into the ground and popping up only once in a while can make overtaking them pretty easy, as long as one keeps an eye out for them as they emerge from the ground. As such, they are easily assigned a threat level alpha like their normal relatives, and shouldn't be too much of an issue to deal with as long as they are not confronted in large swarms. The ice burrower is a subspecies of the normal burrower that lives exclusively in the tunnels of Phendrana Drifts. These creatures behave identically to the relatives and are still easy to kill. The only real difference is that they have developed an icy shell on the backs for minor protection against both predators and insulation against the frigid temperatures of the permafrost they dig through. Otherwise, however, they have little threat to most and can be killed with standard firepower easily. Their assignment to threat level alpha, matching the normal relatives in turn. Ice parasites are the result of parasites adapting to the freezing conditions and lands of Phendrana Drifts and are larger than their normal form, but this does not make them much more of a threat. The icy covering that encapsulates their body keeps them warm relative to the outside air and in turn provides them with armor against attack, but they are still weak enough that they can be killed with a few shots from any beam weapon. As such, they belong to threat level alpha and can more often than not just be avoided by keeping away from the sharp icy carapaces. Ice shriek bats follow the same general biology as their normal relatives, and only different in that they have ice growing on the outside of their bodies as a result of living in the frigid conditions of Phendrana Drifts. But because of the high body temperatures, this covering is usually paper thin and barely protects them much more than the hides from attack. Once more here, an assignment to threat level alpha is appropriate, and they shouldn't even be that big of a threat because of their extreme rarity within the drifts, further making the hunt for them fun for explorers if they're looking to really examine the full biota of Phendrana Drifts. The atomic family is comprised of a unique set of creatures that have slightly different properties and origins, but are all linked in that they are not really alive, instead being artificial constructs made by varying different races with differing properties and powers in accordance with their wide distribution. These creatures, with the atomic being a textbook example, are for the most part comprised entirely of energy and have no real form of sentience, making them little more than living batteries. In fact, atomics in particular are often used as emergency power sources by Galactic Federation ships. They possess a condensed energy core that saps energy from their surroundings and then use that power to radiate electricity outward, producing a fairly large circular body and a series of electrical nodules on the outside that form the shape of a tetrahedron and serve to stabilize the overall shape. These creatures have no real purpose as far as the overall sense of self-awareness is concerned, and merely seem to exist outside the control of other creatures, but this does not mean that they are benign. While they constantly produce electricity from their cores, these creatures have to maintain a stable electrical field around the cores in order to maintain a definite form. As such, when excess electricity builds up on their bodies, they release the excess energy in the form of a projectile of some sort, either as a fire blast of energy or as a drop bomb with a decent blast radius, with the exact type of projectile being determined by the overall structure of their personal electromagnetic field. Atomics generally do not show aggressive behavior towards others, but they are attracted to electrical sources of opposite polarity. As a result of the way most beam weapons are constructed, this means attempting to charge a beam weapon while an atomic or any of its relatives are nearby will cause them to be drawn straight to it, forcing electrical bodies into the unsuspecting targets. Moreover, the electrical power is often enough to scramble visor technology within close proximity, making them a viable threat even from a visual standpoint. In the case of the atomic though, its core is somewhat unstable at all times regardless, so if enough energy can be expended into it from a beam weapon of specific types, it can destabilize the core entirely and cause the atomic to explode. Pulse bombers are a specific and nearly identical relative of the standard atomic, the only difference being their color and the possession of an electrical field that is so intense that it can reflect most types of beam and concussive weapons, though they still maintain a weakness to electricity-based weapons like the wave beam. It is known, however, that these creatures may occasionally change form when exposed to large sources of radiation like phazon, becoming entities called void bombers that are effectively identical in form and attributes but have been rendered invisible to creatures with basic color vision, though they are still observable with thermal and X-ray visor technology. While they might not intend to be aggressive, they tend to drop pieces of excess energy below them in the form of explosive energy balls, causing bursts of electrical energy that can notably damage anything that is too close to the blast radius when the expelled material hits the ground. And while this can be avoided, the large blast radius can make them a severe hazard regardless. As such, an assignment to threat level beta is quite appropriate here, and makes pulse bomber entities best observed at a distance and with non-flash photography, since they might be attracted to the flash and come barreling towards an unsuspecting explorer before they can react and get out of their way. Scatter bombers possess a slightly different form and color than the pulse bomber, and prefer to remain trapped inside tight tunnels, where they constantly discharge the excess electrical energy in the form of a trio of energy beams that slowly rotate around the central unit. This constant offensive attack makes them perfect for the needs of the space pirates and are once not uncommon to see in their bases as defensive units. As with the post-bomb move, these creatures are immune to all forms of damage, minus attacks that come from electricity-based weapons like the wave beam. But it is known that the energy beams are often slow moving and spread apart, that an individual can potentially crawl or roll right between the energy beams to avoid the creatures completely, provided one is quick on their feet or otherwise. While they might behave differently compared to post-bomb move, these entities can still be a noble hazard if one cannot destroy them or get between the energy beams quickly, and thus match their contemporary with an assignment to threat level beta, and should only be aggressively approached if one is able to use electrical energy in some form or another to destroy them. The glider is an abnormal mollusk that is completely harmless for the most part and can actually be more helpful than most of the monsters on Tallon IV. The glider tends to feed on small insects and organic material that floats in the air, and while the populations in Phendrana Drifts seem to be suffering a bit, the few that have made it to the phase of mines have been observed additionally feeding on the saturnine that have grown in the deepest caverns, thankfully never showing any signs of face on corruption. These innocent beasts do not have any real limbs to speak of, so utilize a powerful electromagnetic organ in their bodies to create a repulsion field that allows them to float high off the ground without the ability to actually fly. On the one hand, this seems to work just fine for the glider, as the few creatures that are able to smash through their armored bodies cannot reach them in the air. On the other hand, it has made explorers a bit of a nuisance to their life. This is in reference to the fact that gliders share an almost identical magnetic signature to artificial grapple points, and as a result, they can be used as a target for grapple beam technology. If these creatures are hooked with a grapple beam, it will override their bodily functions and cause them to float in place, though they will still scream a little bit in surprise from the sudden stop. At this point, the grappler can swing over as if they were another grapple point and move on from there, though they can also be frozen in place with the ice beam in order to set a specific trajectory for their oncoming grapple. These creatures suffer no ill effects from this action, thankfully, but the art of glider riding has become a problem in recent years, where idiots in possession of grapple beams attach themselves to the beasts and see how long they can stay on them. While this again does not hurt the creatures, it is still an annoyance in their life, and attempts are being made to crack down on the silly sport for the sake of keeping gliders as a non-hostile species. So please, do a favor to these species who barely even have a threat level at all, namely level alpha, and find a way to get around them without constantly having to abuse their lives. Well now, while they have been briefly mentioned here and there among previous chapters of this presentation, with them having a research station built into the frozen stone of Phendrana Drifts, it is now finally time to talk about the space pirate presence that once existed, and may still exist, on Tallon IV. The space pirates are a confederation of many species that have come to work together for the sake of nothing short of galactic conquest, but they are time and time again defeated by the Hunter and the force of the Galactic Federation. While the mindsets might be the same in most cases, their anatomical forms can differ considerably alongside the types of technology they have available to them. In the case of the space pirates responsible for the first experimentation with the phase on Tallon IV, these creatures possess a hunchbacked arthropod-like form marked by a very thin profile overall, a semi-recessed head structure with razor-sharp teeth, an extremely narrow abdomen, and fairly gracile humanoid limbs, though they share with Tallon IV and the space pirates an extra jaw in the legs between the knee and the ankle. Most of the time this form is hidden, however, as these creatures have taken to wearing thick armor plating on their bodies in order to protect their otherwise fragile frames. This includes a pair of ring supports on the back and underarms that help to support their spine, which are more built for quadrupedal motion than bipedalism. The sentient aggressors, as they were during the events that led to the destruction of Tallon IV's phase on Source, are well trained in both weapon and melee combat, and wield both forearm mounted sights for close quarters combat and a galvanic accelerated cannon for long range assaults. As with the space pirate brethren, these monsters are ruthless and immoral and care little about the cost of their ambition, making them dangerous foes for any race to have to face. All that matters to them are the results, that much I have personally garnered from working with Science Team, and they have made very few friends in turn. Standard space pirates are able to take some amount of punishment and are much more intelligent than most creatures, as they know how to use cover and teamwork in order to take down their targets. Even such, they are still vulnerable to the damaging power of beam and missile-based weapons and can be destroyed as long as one fights smartly and not aggressively towards them, but their own intelligence and aggression easily assigns them to threat level gamma regardless, and are not the kind of entity that an average explorer ever wants to tangle with. Shadow pirates were a special class of space pirates that are distinguished by their dark purple coloration and the helmet that covers their face, which is uniquely equipped with a single viewing lens at the top of the structure that served as a variant of the thermal visor and thus allowed the creatures to see even in the dark. This armor did not provide much in the way of extra defense, as it was primarily designed to act as a cloaking module for these specially trained creatures and was the effective prototype for the chameleon manta that would eventually be granted to the Omega Pirate. As such, these creatures specialized in using their cloaking armor to disappear completely from sight and keep themselves hidden from view. This worked to their advantage as they were trained to act as stealth killers that could hang from just about any surface and ambush opponents without them ever having a clue as to what attacked them. While they were surprisingly nimble and are best used in places that are extremely dark where their opponent can barely see anything to begin with, it is known that this cloaking armor did come with a severe price. The cloaking armor required a large amount of energy in order to work, so as a substitute power source, these creatures had to convert their galvanic accelerated cannon straight into the suit's energy reserves, disabling its usage entirely and only enabling them to use their equipped forearm sights in order to attack others. Thankfully, their cloaking armor only worked well in the visible light spectrum, so they could still be monitored with X-ray visor and especially thermal visor technology. In order to compensate for this potential threat, they tended to attack in large groups and could be difficult to deal with if they could not be safely destroyed one at a time from their hanging perches. The loss of their projectile weapons did serve to hold these beasts back from being effective in the same manner as their normal brethren, but the chance to get the drop on an opponent was still more than worthwhile, in turn sharing a space within threat level Gamma with the other respective troops. The Flying Pirate is the prototype for what would eventually be labeled the Pirate Aero Trooper. These creatures are differentiated from the Space Pirate Brethren by the attachment of powerful jetpacks that allow them to rocket upward into the sky rapidly and in turn fly with nearly no effort at all. These creatures have been specially trained for aerial assault combat and are extremely agile in the air, using both their galvanic accelerated cannons and a missile launcher system built into the jetpacks to destroy targets that are below them. They are still highly intelligent and never travel alone, allowing them to use the numbers game to put their pressure on any target they may be tracking. Even so, they are still only as intelligent about as their normal brethren, and thus can be stunned and taken advantage of with the same strategies. Interestingly enough though, it is worth knowing that while these creatures tend to don armor that helps them blend in slightly with the color of their surroundings, at least in the case of the Glacier 1 based on Phendrana Drifts, their jetpacks give off an enormous amount of heat and thus can be tracked easily with thermal imaging. Moreover, in cases where they may receive critical damage to the bodies of their jetpacks, they will attempt a suicide dive towards their attacker in an attempt to take them down with them and prevent themselves from being captured when the jetpack detonates and kills the creature wearing it. Nonetheless, their battle tactics more than prove to be a formidable and effective fighting force, and with an assignment to threat level Gamma, it can be more than said that they were worth fearing without serious firepower to defend oneself. The Sentry Drone, much as the name would suggest, was a type of security robot utilized by the Space Pirates during their operations on Tallon IV to patrol their bases. At the time, these drones were state-of-the-art and came equipped with a pair of energy-powered machine guns on their arms, as well as a devastating thermal laser on the main chassis that had the power to stun most creatures if it not kill them outright. These security drones were tasked with patrolling the corridors of the Phazon mines and parts of the Phendrana Drifts, laying within the Space Pirates Research Laboratory in the frozen land and the icy tunnels that led to the few bodies of clean water in that area of the planet. When a security drone spots an intruder that has been marked as a threat, it will extend a small pair of wing-like projections and let out an ear-piercing siren that is designed to instantly trigger all defensive systems in the area they are patrolling, locking all doors and in turn sealing them in with their target. Once they have been sealed off, these drones will waste little time in extending a pair of gun-mounted limbs from the body and will begin firing madly at their attacker, flying around rapidly in the process in order to get a better lock on the target and avoid any shots that come their way. Moreover, they emit a powerful signal when they attack that can scramble visor technology for as long as the signal lasts, making them harder to properly target and attack. Their aim is surprisingly good for a basic machine, and they are more than able to deal considerable damage to any target that they assault, but they are not exactly perfect. Because they have to remain light in weight in order for the small thrusters to support them in the air, these machines are armored fairly lightly and thus do not have the ability to take much in the way of damage before being destroyed. Moreover, the Space Pirates were unable to properly develop a shield for them against electrical attacks, so as with other machines, they can be not only easily devastated with weapons like the Wave Beam, but also easily stunned with a charged shot. Even so, these machines with otherwise limited intelligence could be a pain to deal with in groups, even if they didn't have the ballistic weaponry needed to be a real threat, as long as the weakness to electricity could be exploited. That aside though, these drones could still be just as dangerous as living space pirates, cementing their place within threat level Gamma all the same. And now, we finally get the real reason why a research station was set up in the Phendrana Drifts in the first place. Metroids. Although Metroids were originally native to the planet SR-388 only, over the years Space Pirates have done their best to exploit and experiment with these creatures on different planets in order to observe the effects in their development. One of the more well-known strains of these creatures are the Tallon Metroids, so named because they were developed in the atmospheric conditions of Tallon IV. These particular Metroids may not be as dangerous as normal brethren, but they are still a serious threat and should not be underestimated in the slightest. Unlike those native to SR-388, these creatures are much smaller than normal brethren and more vulnerable to direct fire. In fact, just about any form of weaponry is actually able to damage them, though they are still capable of taking a decent amount of punishment. Like their brethren, these creatures possess a green membrane around their body, though those exposed to the atmosphere of Aether have been known to possess a red membrane instead, a trio of nuclei, a small circular tooth-filled maw on the underside, and a pair of mandible-like teeth that are used to grip onto prey and drain their life energy. Because of their small size and weaker defenses, though some specimens referred to as alpha types have been known to be much stronger than others. These creatures can be hurt by small explosives and turn dislodged with them, and are still highly vulnerable to the effects of dark energy and especially cold temperatures, though a few specimens that show resistance against the cold have been known to occasionally pop up in space-powered experiments. It is further interesting to note that these creatures, if attacked harshly, can temporarily adjust their body mass to use it to recover their energy, shrinking and then growing in size while sparking with pure life energy. They are completely invulnerable to attack during this transition, but they can easily be killed afterwards as their bodies begin to break down almost immediately upon harvesting their own biomatter to heal themselves. Tallon Metroids are more docile than normal brethren, but is still a serious threat, as the voracious hunger makes them almost impossible to contain and control without extreme cold on one side, traits that make it easy to assign them to threat level Gamma, only slightly downgraded from the Zabesian Metroids for the decreased relative durability. If allowed to age and mature normally, Tallon Metroids will eventually evolve into the creatures known as Hunter Metroids, which seems to be just as much of an abomination as their predecessors are compared to normal Metroids. These adolescent Metroids possess the same nucleus structure they had as larvae, but the membrane is highly elongated into a more tubular form, and the internal connections between the membrane and the nuclei are unnaturally stretched, giving their body a grotesque and empty appearance. They are usually red in color and are more resilient to damage than Tallon Metroids, but this is not what really sets them apart. As with normal Metroids, they possess a pair of fangs for attaching to and draining the life energy from other creatures, but these teeth are arranged in a more circular shape, are hooked, and are all about the same size. This is because these structures are not the ones used to primarily attack, except in cases where the monsters try to ram their target when angered. Instead, Hunter Metroids possess a pair of highly elongated tentacle-like tooth structures that are used like grappling hooks, being launched far out in front of them so they can latch onto a target and drain its energy from afar. Full direct contact is always not needed, as they can simply fire a blue beam of energy from the tips of their tentacles to drain said energy if they cannot get a clear line of sight or are too far away. These monsters will usually tilt their body horizontally in order to grapple targets as well as reduce their elongated profile, making it substantially harder to hit them. However, despite their improvements, these creatures are still vulnerable to the effects of cold, though they can be a serious pain to eliminate if they cannot be frozen first, and thus match the threat level of the undeveloped state, Gamma, though science team has made it very clear that they stopped testing with these Metroids pretty early on. Having a body part that can latch onto anything in a room, including those conducting tests, tends to not make for the safest and most conducive testing environment. Tallon was the product of a space-powered experiment to determine if it was possible to animate inanimate objects with phazon, and to their great surprise, that in fact proved to be the case. Originally called Project Titan, Tallon demonstrated that phazon did in fact have a level of sentience to it, and could think on its own in the right situations, despite the fact that it was physically just a substance. As part of this project, the space pirates energized large boulders containing common telluric minerals and phazon ore with pure sources of phazon energy, and forced them to interact with one another. The resultant creature began to form a pseudo-body made from a number of randomly shaped rocks of varying sizes containing phazon ore, connected together by phazon energy alone, and the final product proved to be more powerful than the space pirates could have ever imagined. However, this proved to be too good of a case of creation, as Tallon became increasingly violent and difficult to control as its size and power increased. Eventually, the space pirates had to develop thermal visor technology to locate its weak points to make capturing and transportation of the monster easier, and when it still proved to be too much, they locked the creature inside the quarantine cave and abandoned all research on it. They had been successful in their experiments, and did seem to still want to try and tame the entity to make it use as a guard to the phazon mines, but they would never go any further with that branch of study as they had no reliable way to control the monster. When confronted by the hunter, this false life form was more than happy to try and crush her into dust. Despite the fact that Tallon was little more than a collection of phazon-charged rocks, it proved to be a powerful and intelligent creature that adapted to using the freezing power of Phendrana Drifts for its own purposes. From afar, Tallon could summon a trio of small phazon-charged rocks to fling at its target, which would then home in on them unless destroyed before reaching the target. In addition, it had the power to pound the ground with its fist to send out an ultra-frigid ground-based beam towards its target that could freeze them solid if hit, giving Tallon the chance to then crush them with its other attacks. If it had to confront its targets in close quarters, Tallon could roll its entire body into a ball and crush anything and everything that dared to stray into its path, and was surprisingly good at getting close to and following its target until it made physical contact. Finally, if it needed to buy some time, the creature could cloak its body by summoning a temporary snowstorm, though how this particular power worked has yet to be determined. Due to the sheer amount of phazon energy radiating from its body, Tallon could disrupt and effectively negate any form of auto targeting, but this does not mean that Tallon did not have its weak points. Because of the highly chaotic nature of phazon, some portions of Tallon's body act as energized keystones that kept up the energy field that allowed it to maintain its physical form. These particular keystones radiated much more heat than the rest of their body, and thus showed up strongly on thermal visor technology, hence why the space pirates developed the technology to control Tallon in the first place. By locking onto these targets, the hunter was able to damage the keystones enough for the outer layer of rocket material to be busted off, flooding the visor with radiating heat and thus requiring a switch back to the standard combat visor. From here, she was able to target the revealed weak points and destroy them piece by piece, the monster's physical form shifting every once in a while to adjust for its loss of body mass, until she finally destroyed the main core stone that served as the chest piece for the monster. With the destruction of all its major Phazon keystones, the artist could not control its body anymore, and the rest of its form exploded. While some might make jokes about this entity literally being a living pile of rocks, it is still a true testament to the power that Phazon was known to have, and it wasn't as dumb as a bag of rocks either. Its natural instincts made it a terrifying force for even the space pirates to try and handle, and combined with its incredible resilience and their own inability to effectively handle it, it is more than deserving of place within threat level Delta, and not an experiment that will hopefully be repeated ever again for the sake of safe passage for travelers throughout Phendrana Drifts. As it exists as the polar opposite in terms of environment and temperature to Magmoor Caverns, Phendrana Drifts is honestly no safer to truly examine than the seething pits of hellfire contained in the planet's depths, as the extreme cold of the land can make it extremely difficult for explorers to survive if they don't have protection against extreme cold. But that's only part of the reason why it deserves to be rated just as dangerous to explore. While the freezing cold isn't enough to freeze everything solid, there are many pools of liquid water that exist in the outer reaches of the land, filled with a variety of aquatic life forms, and many of those organisms that call the land home are also among some of the most unique and dangerous natural predators on the planet, the Sheegoth being a prime example of this. While such entities do tend to be on the rare side for explorers to deal with, this does not take away from the sheer danger they can pose to others that manage to get in their way, and they all more often than not tend to be rather territorial and hostile to any alien presence they don't recognize. This is only further made into an issue by the Space Pirate Research Facility embedded in the outskirts of the region, and while it may mostly be abandoned now, that doesn't make it any less dangerous to explore without sufficient lighting. Despite this, it can still be said that, as long as one keeps the more centralized areas of the drifts and doesn't explore too deeply there, it can be a winter wonderland for explorers and a nice place to host casual events. Just make sure to keep the wildlife at bay if you can, as even the presence of baby Sheegoth in an area can more often than not be a ticking time bomb if they aren't cleared out first. That takes us here to the end of this presentation on Phendrana Drifts, and I hope that this all proved to be useful for those that are looking to take a visit there sometime in the future. We're almost done now with our examination of the environment and organisms found on Tallon IV, and in the next and last video report on the planet, we'll be taking a look at the Phazon Mines, Artifact Temple, and the Impact Crater, and in turn, we'll finally overview the end of the Hunter's campaign on Tallon IV, and the end of Phazon on the planet as we know it. Thank you for reaching the end of this presentation. While we might not always get along, the Space Pirates and myself, in whatever capacity we can manage, are dedicated to analyzing and examining the life forms of many different worlds, extant and extinct, to show the great variety of life that exists out within the greater cosmos. If you enjoyed this info video and would like to see more, please like, comment, and subscribe for more information. We'll do our best to keep pumping out data so the greater public has an understanding of what to expect when exploring alien planets and their denizens. With that, have a safe journey, and have your bribes prepared beforehand if you happen to come near our territory.